Alright guys, hope you're doing well, hope you're all keeping safe. Yesterday, Outriders dropped their first big dev news update, which covered everything from stability issues, matchmaking, balancing, and more. For the full patch notes, please check out my video yesterday where I went over everything. Now since that post, the community has gone nuclear. Okay, I might be exaggerating, but players are not happy. Only a week old, the devs have decided they've seen enough already, and they bought down the nerf hammer. A poll I put out already has 70% saying these changes are not good. It's a pretty bold move by the devs, so let's talk about what's happened and why these nerfs may do more harm than good. So to start off with then, let's talk about what's been nerfed and why, for those people who didn't check out my video yesterday. Well, firstly, and quite possibly the biggest issue, is the nerf to bullet abilities, twisted rounds, blighted rounds, and volcanic rounds. And here's what the devs had to say. While we fully intend to provide the overpowered feel for the best builds out there, we're also committed to making sure there is build diversity in the top performing builds. Late in the demo lifecycle, we discovered a bug with regards to the bullet augmentation abilities damage calculation formula. While we fixed this bug, some unforeseen imbalances were unfortunately introduced, which has led to bullet-based abilities vastly outperforming other skills. The main problem with this is that such bullet-based builds require much less investment to make them top tier compared to other builds. To achieve this, we have made a couple of adjustments for the Trickster and Technomancer classes who benefit the most from their bullet abilities power. It's uncertain as to whether these changes will prove too strong or too weak, so please do consider this to be only the first step, as we will continue monitoring and adjusting them in the future. Just like you, we hope to see more inspiring and crazy combinations of abilities and mods. So this is the context provided by the devs, and here are the nerfs. The base cooldown of the twisted round skill has increased to 25 seconds, previously 16. While infinite uptime on bullet abilities was always our intention, it is intended to be high risk, high reward playstyle. However, given the current power of this skill, there is very little risk involved in this ability given its short cooldown, even when players fail to trigger ammo replenishment. Increasing its cooldown in combination with adjusting its damage should increase the risk and make the playstyle a more thrilling experience. The Trickster's Hero Tree Nose, Disruptive Firepower, Sign of Power, Outrider Executioner have had their power reduced to 35%, previously 50%. The combination of twisted rounds increase the firepower on top of the multiplayers provided by the class tree led to a huge increase of damage dealt by this ability. While we do understand the satisfaction this kind of power can bring, it is currently vastly outperforming our wildest expectations, and we therefore need to bring it down a notch. Vulnerable status, power reduced to 15%, previously 25%. The Technomancer Hero Tree Node damage against poison has had its power reduced to 15%, previously 30%, so 50% reduction there. While the Technomancer's blighted rounds do not provide any damage increase on their own, other than ignoring armor as anomaly damage, they do provide an excellent tool for spreading the vulnerable and toxic status, which in turn can scale out to proportion. The Pyromancer Hero Tree Node Trial of Ashes has been reduced 15% extra damage, previously 30%. If you watched my video yesterday, you would have probably noticed my disappointment at the sight of these nerfs. I've only recently been able to obtain some good pieces of gear with some good talents and mods to make my Technomancer poison build feel relatively strong. This build revolves around blighted rounds, toxic, and the vulnerable status effect, all of which got hit with the nerf hammer. Oh, and critical rating damage multiplier also got nerfed on the tactical assault rifle, the weapon I use as well, so overall my build got hit pretty hard. Now in response to these nerfs, you've only got to go to the Outriders tweet about the dev update, or just go on the Reddit post and check the comments to see how annoyed people are about these nerfs, and there's a couple of reasons why. So here's a few of the more common reasons. Number one, expeditions are already difficult for 99% of the player base, and just because some people who have grinded the game to death and found the perfect formula, everyone is getting punished. I couldn't agree more with this statement or this sentiment. As someone who has put quite a lot of hours into this game already and currently sat at challenge tier 12 or challenge tier 13 I might be, with level 48 weapons and gear and running a Technomancer poison build with high damage, I can strongly agree that expeditions, they're very difficult. In fact, I'm struggling to get to challenge tier 14 at this point because my build is just not good enough yet. Now of course there are people who are challenge tier 15 who can stomp everything, but they probably make up the 1%, and I think the majority of the player base are probably in the same boat as me, struggling to beat these expeditions in the time required to increase their tier, even with some good gear and weapons. So why then have the devs decided to nerf stuff when instead I think buffs are needed to other classes and to anomaly power. Number 2, this is a PvE only game, and finding the strongest builds to beat expeditions in the fastest time possible is the goal. Again, couldn't agree more with this. The whole point of a time trial mode is to complete it as fast as possible, and in a PvE only game, where's the harm in having strong builds? In fact, the devs specifically say in their dev update they look forward to seeing some more inspiring and crazy combinations of abilities and mods. Well, people aren't going to try and find these crazy builds if they're scared about them being nerfed in a week. Again, I want to reiterate, the vast majority of people are finding expeditions pretty difficult and are probably nowhere near challenge tier 15. In fact, I don't think people are even near challenge tier 13 or 12 at this point. I think the majority of people are below that. Players want to find the best stuff. They want to create the best and most unique builds, and they want to feel powerful. But they're not going to try that if they're afraid of being nerfed. And for number 3, bullet abilities are used by the majority because anomaly power is weak. Now, I don't know enough about anomaly power to understand where it sits in the meta, but from what I've seen and read, anomaly power appears to be very underpowered compared to bullet abilities, and yet there's not one mention of a buff to anomaly power in the dev update. And you know why that is? Because there's not going to be one. Instead, the devs decided to nerf bullet abilities. I think this is a bad move. I have tried to run an anomaly build with Technomancer on expeditions, and it was brutal. From what I've read as well, anomaly power, for the most part, is just not an option on higher tier expeditions, so it really doesn't make much sense to not buff them. Overall then, I do think the devs have made a bit of a bad move here. It's definitely a very premature move for sure. What I suspect is happening is the devs have seen these YouTube videos or Twitch videos, whatever it is, of people clearing challenge tier 15 in 5 minutes or whatever after 1 week of playing. And they never anticipated this. They even said in their dev update that they didn't anticipate such strong builds so early on in the game. Well, one of the questions I have then is, where is the testing on this to pick this stuff out? Now, with every looter shooter, there's always going to be meta builds, there's always going to be powerful builds. But considering this game's only been out a week and people are beating the highest tier content in under 5 minutes, there's probably questions to be asked about the testing of this game. Now, I also suspect they are worried about the community. They're going to see these videos and they're going to start to do the same. And once they have, they're going to leave the game, because after challenge tier 15 expeditions, I don't think there's anything else to play, certainly not content-wise, except maybe moving on to other classes and going through the story and doing all the stuff over and over again. I think this is their way of slowing down our progress, but what I think they fail to understand is every PvE looter shooter will have that 1% who are going to blow through the content and have the most OP builds posted on YouTube in days. It happened in Destiny, it happened in The Division, I think it's happened in every looter shooter in existence. That's just the way it is. 99% of the player base, however, won't. And here especially, I do think that's the case. As I said, I don't see me reaching challenge tier 15 for some time, because challenge tier 13 is incredibly difficult for me right now. I can't even complete it, let alone do it in 15 minutes to increase the tier. Oh, and one last thing to add to that, this kind of just adds insult to injury. The devs decreased the time allowed to complete some expeditions in order to progress a tier, so yeah, expeditions, or some of them, are actually going to be even more difficult to progress in. Let me know what you think of these changes in the comments down below. I suspect 75% of you will agree these changes are a bad move, and I'd advocate for a reverse to these changes and instead buff to underperforming classes, abilities or mods. On reflection, I think the devs decided to go with a quick fix here in fear of everyone storming through the whole game in a couple of weeks, and it's not live service, so that would be the end. But they've only got to look at other games which have followed a similar trend to see why this rarely is a good idea. My best advice, as someone who really has no expertise in the intricacies of making a game, but as a consumer of looter shooter games for the past 20 years, don't encourage players to come up with the craziest builds and then nerf those builds when players do. This is one surefire way to push people away from a pretty solid game, not considering all the stability and matchmaking issues. But that's it, guys. Thanks very much for watching this video. Hopefully you all have a fantastic weekend, and until next week, epic out.